There's something almost unbearable about silence. Not the kind of silence that feels peaceful, like sitting on a quiet beach at sunrise, but the kind that leaves an empty space where certainty used to be. That's the kind of silence that lingers in the mind, that creates a void he can't escape from. Because the moment you stop responding, the moment you remove your presence from his life, he is left with nothing but his own thoughts. And that's where the suffering begins. Human beings have a deep psychological need for certainty. We crave resolution. When something is open-ended, an unfinished conversation, an unresolved situation, a missing response, it eats at us. Our minds automatically try to close the gap, to create a sense of understanding. And when there are no answers, we start to spiral. We replay past moments, searching for meaning. We imagine possibilities, often making them far worse than they actually are. And most of all, we start to question ourselves. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Because while he may have been the one to create the distance, while he may have been the one to pull back, hurt you, or take you for granted, he wasn't expecting silence in return. He was expecting noise. He was expecting a reaction. He was expecting you to show up in some form: anger, sadness, frustration, even an attempt to fix things. Because when someone walks away from you, they still want to feel important. They still want to believe they have power over your emotions. And as long as you react, they get to keep that sense of control. But the second you go silent, you disrupt the entire dynamic. Suddenly you're not predictable anymore. He doesn't know what's going on in your head, what you're thinking, what you're feeling. And that's when the tables turn, because now he's the one left wondering. It starts small at first. Maybe he assumes you're just giving it a day or two. Maybe he even tells himself that he doesn't care. But as time stretches on, that assumption begins to crack. The longer you remain silent, the more he starts to feel the absence. And absence is powerful. It makes people notice what they once took for granted. He'll try to rationalize it. Maybe you're busy. Maybe you're trying to play games. Maybe you're just being stubborn. But deep down, a different question begins to creep in. What if she's actually moving on? And that's the moment he starts to feel the weight of what he's lost. Because suddenly the certainty that he once had, that you would always be there, that you would always respond, that you would always care, is no longer there. And he realizes that silence isn't just the absence of noise. It's the presence of indifference. This is why silence is so powerful. It doesn't just punish, it forces reflection. It makes a person sit with their own choices, with their own actions, with the reality of what they did. And while words can be debated, defended against, or ignored, silence leaves no room for escape. Now, some people will tell you that silence is manipulative, that withholding communication is a form of playing games. But that's only true if the intention is to control. What we're talking about here isn't about control, it's about power. And there's a difference. Control is about trying to force someone to feel something. Power is about standing firm in your own value and letting the absence of your presence speak for itself. Because the truth is, you don't need to convince someone to regret losing you. You don't need to argue your worth. You don't need to chase someone to make them see what they had. You just need to remove yourself. Let time and space do the work. Let the silence become the mirror that forces them to see what they've done. And the best part, by the time he realizes what he lost, you'll have already moved forward. Because while he's busy suffering in his own uncertainty, you're growing. You're healing. You're becoming a version of yourself that no longer needs his validation. That's when silence becomes the loudest sound he's ever heard. Because when he finally reaches out, when he finally tries to get back what he threw away, he won't be met with the woman he remembers. He'll be met with someone who is no longer waiting for him to see her worth, because she already sees it for herself. And that is when he will suffer the most, because regret is loud, but silence is deafening. There's a strange paradox when it comes to human nature. We only truly begin to appreciate something once it's no longer easily available to us. It's not that we don't recognize value when it's right in front of us, but familiarity has a way of dulling urgency. When we believe that something or someone will always be there, we stop feeling the need to fight for it. We become complacent. We assume that no matter what we do, no matter how much we push or pull away, that presence will remain. until one day it doesn't. And that's when the suffering begins. See, when you remove yourself, when you stop filling in the gaps, when you stop being the one to initiate, to check in, to remind him of what he once had, something very powerful starts to happen. His mind begins to fill in the silence with questions. And those questions aren't casual. They're the kind that gnaw at the edges of his thoughts in quiet moments. Why hasn't she reached out? Has she really moved on? Did she really care about me as much as I thought she did? Now, at first, he might try to brush it off. He might even feel relief. Maybe he wanted space. Maybe he thought he needed distance. But human beings are wired for attachment. And the moment he starts to feel your absence, the moment he realizes that you are no longer a guaranteed presence in his life, his perspective shifts. Because here's the truth. When something is always available, it's easy to take it for granted. The moment it's gone, it becomes rare, and scarcity creates value. It's a fundamental psychological principle. We chase what we fear losing, not what we assume will always be there. This is why silence is not passive, it's powerful. When you stop chasing, when you stop feeding energy into something that no longer feeds you, it forces the other person to step into a reality they didn't expect, a reality where you are no longer waiting, a reality where they have to sit with the consequences of their own choices. And what makes this truly impactful is that it's not about revenge. It's not about making someone suffer for the sake of suffering. It's about reclaiming your own power, because as long as you're the one keeping the connection alive, as long as you're the one reaching out, as long as you're the one holding space for them, they never have to feel the weight of what they've lost. They never have to confront the reality of what happens when they no longer have access to you. But the moment you step back, the moment you remove your energy from the situation, everything changes. And here's where it becomes even more powerful. When he finally does realize what he lost, when he starts to feel the regret creeping in, when he begins to wonder if he made a mistake, he's going to reach out. It might be subtle at first, a random message, an attempt to check in, something that seems casual on the surface but is actually a test. He wants to know if he still has access to you, if he still holds that same place in your heart, if he can still come and go as he pleases. And this is the defining moment, because if you respond immediately, if you rush to fill in the silence, if you hand back the comfort he once had, you teach him that nothing has changed, that you were just waiting for him to notice you again, that he still holds all the power. But if you remain composed, if you continue living your life, if you don't make his validation the thing that dictates your actions, then suddenly he's the one who has to fight for you. Suddenly he's the one who has to prove his worth. And this is where you win, not by playing games, not by manipulating emotions, but by standing in your own value. Because when someone truly sees your worth, they don't expect you to beg for their attention. They rise to meet you. So if you've ever found yourself in a situation where you're chasing, where you're trying to make someone see what they had, I want you to stop. I want you to step back. I want you to give them the gift of missing you, because that absence will do more to make them regret losing you than any words ever could. And when they finally realize what they lost, when they come back, searching for what they once took for granted, you'll be standing exactly where you should be, firm in your worth, knowing that you never had to chase someone to be valued. Because the truth is, the people who truly matter, the ones who genuinely care, they won't need to lose you to realize your value. But the ones who do, let them suffer in their own silence. There's a profound shift that happens when you stop making yourself so available to someone who once took you for granted. It's not just about silence, it's about the psychological impact that silence has. Because when a person is used to your presence, your reassurance, your effort, they don't actually have to think about what life would be like without you. They assume you'll always be there, always responding, always filling in the gaps, until one day you don't. And that's when the discomfort begins. Human beings hate uncertainty. We crave security, predictability, and control over our environment. The moment you stop reaching out, the moment you pull back your energy, you disrupt the comfort they've built for themselves. Suddenly, they don't know where they stand with you. And that feeling, that is what makes them suffer. Because here's the truth. When you're always available, always the one initiating, you become a constant. And constants don't create urgency. They don't create a sense of loss. But when you remove yourself from the equation, when you introduce the unknown, it forces them to start questioning everything. Is she mad at me? Did I mess up? Has she moved on? Is she talking to someone else? The mind fills in the silence with its own anxiety. And that's what makes this so powerful. When you stop giving them access to your emotions, to your thoughts, to your attention, they no longer get to use you as a source of comfort. They no longer get the privilege of assuming that no matter what happens, you'll still be there waiting. And that's where the real suffering begins, not because you're punishing them, but because they now have to sit in the consequences of their own actions. See, most people don't realize what they have when it's right in front of them, but when it's gone, that's when they start to understand. And it's not even about love, it's about power. It's about the psychological game of control and validation. Because if someone knows they can always come back, that no matter what happens, you'll still be there, then where's the risk? Where's the urgency? Where's the fear of losing you? But the moment they sense that they might have actually lost you, everything changes. Suddenly, they're the ones wondering what you're thinking. They're the ones checking their phone, waiting for a message that doesn't come. They're the ones feeling the absence you used to feel. And that is the turning point, because now the balance of power has shifted. Now, instead of you being the one suffering in silence, they're the ones experiencing what it feels like to be left in uncertainty. They're the ones realizing that maybe, just maybe, they pushed too far, that maybe they overestimated your willingness to always be there. And the best part? You're not doing anything to make this happen. You're not playing games. You're not manipulating. You're simply choosing yourself, choosing to no longer be the one who carries the entire emotional burden of the connection, choosing to let them experience what it means to live without your presence. And the longer you stay silent, the louder your absence becomes. This is why so many people make the mistake of breaking the silence too soon. They think, what if he forgot about me? What if he moved on? What if my silence doesn't matter to him? But that's the wrong question. The real question is, why would you want someone who only values you when they're afraid of losing you? Because someone who truly sees your worth doesn't need silence to remind them of it. They value you in your presence. They appreciate you without needing to experience your absence. But for those who don't, let time teach them. Let the silence be their lesson. Because the reality is, if he truly cares, if he truly regrets, if he truly feels your absence, he will reach out. He will start to feel the weight of what he lost. And if he doesn't, then he was never the right person for you to begin with. So let time work in your favor. Let the silence speak louder than any words ever could. And when he finally realizes what he lost, when he finally feels the pain of your absence, you'll be exactly where you should be moving forward, knowing that you never had to chase someone who was meant for you in the first place. When you go silent, something fascinating happens. People start projecting their own insecurities onto the situation. See, we often assume that if we're not actively reminding someone of our presence, they'll just move on without a second thought. But the reality is, silence creates a void, and that void is uncomfortable. The mind hates unanswered questions. And when someone is left in that silence, they start filling in the gaps with their own thoughts, doubts, and regret. That's why staying silent can be one of the most powerful things you ever do, because the moment you stop explaining yourself, stop reassuring them, stop proving your worth, they are forced to confront something they've been avoiding, how they really feel about you. When you are constantly reaching out, putting in the effort, making sure they knew how much you cared, you were giving them a sense of security, even if they weren't treating you right, even if they were taking you for granted, they still had that safety net. Your presence was a given, something they could rely on without ever having to question what their life would be like without you. But when you remove that certainty, the entire dynamic shifts. Now, instead of feeling like they have control, they start to feel powerless. Because the thing about silence is that it forces introspection. It makes a person sit with their own thoughts. And when someone has treated you poorly or taken you for granted, that silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels like pressure. Think about it. When someone isn't sure whether they've lost you, they start to wonder. And wondering turns into questioning. And questioning turns into overanalyzing. Did I push her too far? Is she really done this time? What if she's moving on? Why isn't she reaching out? These thoughts don't come from nowhere. They come from a realization that maybe, just maybe, they made a mistake, that they underestimated you, that they assumed you would always be there, always forgiving, always trying. But here's the best part. This entire process happens without you having to lift a finger. Because when you go silent, when you stop explaining yourself, you are no longer responsible for their emotion. You are no longer doing the emotional labor of making them feel comfortable, of fixing things, of proving why you're worth fighting for. Instead, they are left alone with their own thoughts. And in that space, they begin to understand something they never had to confront before. What life feels like without you. And here's what's really powerful about that. Regret doesn't come from knowing you're still an option. It comes from the fear that they lost their chance. That's why silence is so effective. Because if you argue, if you plead, if you try to make them see your worth, they don't have to face the reality of losing you. They can convince themselves that you'll always be there, that they still have time, that you're just acting emotional or playing games. But when you do nothing, when you say nothing, when you stop proving, stop convincing, stop explaining, that's when they start feeling the weight of their own actions. Because here's something people don't talk about enough. Most of the time, when someone hurts you or pushes you away, they don't actually expect to lose you. They think you'll still be there, still waiting, still hoping they'll come round. And that's why your silence is so powerful, because it sends a message that words never could. You no longer have access to me. That realization alone can be enough to make someone start questioning everything, because we don't value what's easy to get. We value what we think we might lose forever. And the longer you stay silent, the more their mind starts working against them. They start replaying old conversations, remembering the way you used to be. They start comparing their life now to the life they had when you were in it. And slowly, regret starts creeping in. This is why people suddenly come back after weeks, months, sometimes even years of silence. It's not because they just realized they care. It's because the absence of you finally caught up to them. And here's the truth. Someone who truly values you will never need to lose you to appreciate you. But for those who took you for granted, sometimes the only way for them to understand your worth is to experience life without you. So let them sit in that silence. Let them feel the discomfort. Let them be the one questioning for once. Because if they truly regret, if they truly miss you, if they truly understand what they lost, they will reach out. And if they don't, then they were never meant for you in the first place. Your silence is not about punishing them. It's about protecting your energy. It's about refusing to chase someone who wasn't willing to keep you. It's about finally understanding that your worth isn't something you should have to prove. So let time do what words never could. Let your absence be the lesson they never saw coming. And most importantly, let yourself move forward knowing that the right person will never need to lose you in order to know what they have. There is something deeply unsettling about realizing you can no longer reach someone in the way you once could. When you stay silent, when you remove yourself from the equation, you take away a person's ability to control the narrative. And that, more than anything, is what makes them suffer. See, when someone knows they can get a reaction from you, they feel safe. Even if that reaction is anger, even if it's frustration, even if it's pain, at least it tells them they still hold a place in your mind, that they still have influence over your emotions, that they still matter. But when you stop responding, when you go quiet, when you no longer play into their attempts to keep you emotionally tethered, that's when the reality of their actions starts to sink in. Because silence isn't just the absence of words. It's the absence of validation, the absence of reassurance, the absence of the comfort they once took for granted. And that absence, it forces them to confront something they never had to face before, what it truly feels like to be without you. Here's what most people don't realize. Humans are wired to seek certainty. We crave knowing where we stand with others. It gives us a sense of control, a sense of predictability. But when that certainty is removed, when suddenly they don't know what you're thinking, when they don't know if they still have a place in your life, it creates unease. At first, they might tell themselves they don't care. They might convince themselves they're fine, that they're better off, that you'll eventually come back. But the longer the silence stretches, the harder it becomes to ignore. Because now they're not just missing you, they're missing the version of themselves they got to be when they had your attention. The person they were when they had you caring, loving, giving. They start realizing that maybe they weren't as secure as they thought. Maybe they weren't as irreplaceable as they believed. And that's when the suffering truly begins. Because regret doesn't come from the loss itself. It comes from the slow, creeping understanding that they were the reason for it. That they made choices, said things, or acted in ways that led to this. And the worst part? There's no one left to blame, no argument to have, no explanation to offer, just the silence, echoing back their own mistakes. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Most people don't suffer in obvious ways. They won't always admit they miss you. They won't always reach out and say, I regret what I did. Instead, it shows up in smaller ways, in the restless nights, in the sudden waves of nostalgia, in the unexpected moments when something reminds them of you and they realize they can't just call you up anymore. They start revisiting old messages, scrolling through photos, looking for signs that maybe, just maybe, you still care. But when they see nothing, when they hear nothing, when they realize that you've truly gone silent, that's when the fear sets in. Fear that you've moved on. Fear that someone else now gets to experience what they took for granted. Fear that they waited too long to make things right. And fear, more than anything, is what drives people to regret, because the truth is, people always think they have more time. They assume you'll always be there, that they can reach out whenever they want, that they can fix things on their own timeline. But silence disrupts that illusion. It forces them to see time as it really is, something they can't control. And here's what makes it even more powerful. By the time they realize what they've lost, you've already healed. You've already grown. You've already stepped into the version of yourself that no longer waits for someone to appreciate them. That's the real lesson here. Silence isn't about making them suffer. It's about setting yourself free. It's about removing yourself from a cycle where you constantly have to prove your worth to someone who never should have doubted it in the first place. So let them wonder. Let them feel the weight of their own actions. Let them sit in the discomfort of not knowing where they stand with you anymore. Because the longer you stay silent, the more they will suffer, not because you're punishing them, but because they will finally have to face the truth. And that truth is this: you were never theirs to lose. They simply failed to appreciate what they had while they had it. The final and perhaps most important thing to understand about silence is this: it's not just about making someone else miss you. It's about reclaiming your power. Because at the heart of this entire dynamic, at the root of their suffering and regret, is a fundamental shift in control. See, when someone hurts you, when they take you for granted, there's usually an unspoken assumption that they have the upper hand, that they get to dictate how the story ends, that they can walk away, string you along, or assume you'll always be there if they ever decide to come back. But silence disrupts that narrative entirely. It tells them, no, you don't get to decide how this plays out. You don't get to hurt me and still have access to me. You don't get to walk away and expect me to chase after you. And that shift, when you go from being someone they thought they could control to someone they can't even reach anymore, that's what breaks them. Because here's what people don't always realize. Losing you isn't what hurts them the most. What hurts them is losing the privilege of your presence. They start to see that your love, your attention, your energy, it wasn't a given. It wasn't something they were entitled to. It was a gift. And now that gift is gone. At first, they may not admit it. They may not even fully understand what they're feeling. But over time, as the silence stretches, as the reality sets in, they begin to grasp something deeply unsettling. They are now powerless. Powerless to reach you. Powerless to know what you're thinking. Powerless to undo the damage they caused. And that powerlessness, that's what keeps them up at night. Because when you're still in their life, when you're still reacting, even if it's with anger, even if it's with pain, they know they still matter to you. They know they still have some level of influence. But when you go silent, when you remove yourself completely, they are forced to confront the one thing they never expected, what it truly feels like to be without you. And the longer that silence lasts, the deeper that realization cuts. At first, they might tell themselves they don't care. They might convince themselves they're fine. But then little things start to happen. They catch themselves checking their phone, wondering if maybe, just maybe, you'll reach out. They start replaying old memories, trying to pinpoint the moment they lost you for good. They scroll through old conversations looking for some sign that they could still fix this. But they see nothing. And that's when the panic starts to set in. Because now they're not just missing you, they're regretting you. They regret not treating you better when they had the chance. They regret thinking you would always be there. They regret assuming they could come back whenever they wanted. And regret is a powerful thing because it doesn't just hurt, it lingers. It follows them into their quiet moments, creeping up when they least expect it. It turns into questions that haunt them. What if I had handled things differently? What if I hadn't let my ego get in the way? What if I had just been honest about what I felt? But by the time they start asking these questions, it's too late. And that's the beauty of silence. It's not about playing games. It's not about manipulation. It's about finally choosing yourself. It's about understanding that the person who truly values you won't put you in a position where you have to prove your worth. The person who genuinely cares won't risk losing you in the first place. So when you stay silent, when you refuse to entertain the cycle, when you no longer give them the validation they crave, you're not just making them miss you. You're teaching them a lesson they'll never forget. That love isn't something to be taken for granted, that presence isn't something to be assumed, that once you lose something truly valuable, sometimes you don't get it back. And that's what makes them suffer. Not just for a moment, not just for a week, but for a long, long time. Because the pain of losing someone who genuinely cared isn't something you can just shake off. It stays, it shapes them. It changes how they see love, how they see relationships, how they see themselves. And by the time they finally understand what they lost, you'll have already moved forward, not because you needed to make them suffer, but because you realized something even more important. You never needed them to begin with.